Hi, my name is Rick Edgeman from Forte State University, and I'm going to talk to you today just a little bit about customer needs and methods for uncovering what those customer needs are. As you can probably see from the bottom of the slide, I actually have multiple appointments. I'm at Forte State University. I also have an honorary professor position at Southern Denmark University as honorary professor of engineering operations management in the Faculty of Engineering. And for a long time, I've had an association with Aarhus University in Denmark, 21 years worth at this point in time. So I retained a 20% appointment there when I returned to the US from Denmark after several years in 2015. But the point today really is to talk about customer needs, and all those things come together, by the way, all those places I've been, because they all gather around a central theme, and that central theme is about quality. Quality management, quality improvement, business excellence, performance excellence, enterprise excellence, and customer needs lie at the heart of each and every one of those things. So here's one of the problems that we face. One of the problems that we face is that if you look at organizations, their performance goes up over time, generally speaking, whether that's in manufacturing processes or in terms of delivering what they need in terms of financial results or in terms of how they treat their people, whatever the case may be. The problem, however, is that they're going up at a rate that is ordinarily speaking consistent with what you see as the line on this graph of continuous improvement. Now, the problem is that customer expectations usually outpace the pace of continuous improvement. So what happens over time is that you have a performance gap that develops, and you fall further and further behind unless you know how to address that performance gap. And there are some very useful techniques for doing that, and included among those would be, for example, benchmarking, Six Sigma techniques, various quality management techniques, and so on. But the goal is to become not just a learning organization, but a rapid learning organization, a fast learning organization. Fast learning so that you can fail faster, you can learn faster, you can succeed faster. Okay, that's what we're after, and that's how you eventually approach that performance gap and try and close it. So when we look at customers, here's one of the problems, and I'll illustrate it with a story. So I had a father-in-law who died several years ago, and that father-in-law sold me at one point in time a 1979 Buick Regal with a turbo. It was a car that didn't have that many miles on it. It was a beautiful car. He sold it to me at a very reasonable price. Okay. Now, here was the problem, that I had that car for 2 years, and in 2 years, I had to invest $5,600 in repairs. I still recall the single biggest car repair bill that I've ever had, $1,999.97, and that was in January 1986. So, for that to stick with me 32 and a half years tells you something about the sort of angst that I had toward that car and the difficulties that it caused. So it became so unreliable that I didn't know if I was going to make it to work, whether or not I was going to get home from work. I could start the car, it might not turn off. There were so many things that went on with that. Now, to my father-in-law's credit, he never knew all of that because for him it was a company car maintained by the company, and he thought he was giving me a very good deal. And in fact, it would have been a very good deal if it just hadn't had so many failures. So, did I ever complain to GM, the makers of Buick General Motors? The answer is no, I didn't. Now, I've told this story to literally tens of thousands of people, usually to illustrate the point that I'm going to be making here, which is that often unhappy customers don't complain, they just go away. And so companies that are focused on customer satisfaction, well, they're not just focused on customer satisfaction. They want their customers to be satisfied, of course. They want them to be loyal. But beyond even loyalty, they want their customers to be their advocates. They want them to be their best walking advertisements who make sales for them fundamentally without remuneration. That's what they want out of their customers. But complaints have another story behind them. So for every unhappy customer complaint that actually makes it to headquarters, there are about 25 other ones that they didn't bother to make that complaint. 25 other people. I would have been one of those 25 in the story about the car. Okay, but you know, the original person and then those 25 like that, on average, tend to tell a lot of other people. They tell about 10 other people. And the people that they tell other people, about 5 each. So that what you're looking at by the end of the line is that somewhere between about 1,500 and 1,600 people have heard these things for every one complaint that makes it to basically the company headquarters, okay, to a level where they can really do something about it. Now, here's the thing about it. Those figures are old figures. Those figures were figures that came into play before the age of social media. Now, if you look at how contagious things can be on social media, I'm sure the number is far larger than 15 to 1,600 for every complaint that makes it to the attention of management. So we want to take customer complaints very, 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 very seriously. Okay, that means that we need to have methods for being able to listen to and to acquire the voice of the customer. Now, just acquiring the voice of the customer, by the way, won't be enough. And here's an illustration of what I mean by that. If I were to speak to you just a little bit in Danish, there's a good chance that you don't understand Danish because it's a very small language group. So I could say something like, Hi, jeg hedder Rick, jeg kommer fra USA, jeg bor der, jeg har 3 børn, jeg bor in Kansas. I could say a lot of different things. Now, fundamentally, what I said was, Hi, I'm Rick. I have 3 kids. I'm a teacher. I live in Hays, Kansas. Now, that's about all that I said. But I could have said more, and you probably wouldn't have understood it. You probably picked up little pieces of it. Just having the voice of the customer isn't enough. We need to be able to understand the voice of the customer. Understanding the voice of the customer is not enough. We need to be able to activate the voice of the customer. But before we can ever activate it, before we can ever understand it, we have to acquire it in the first place. And so we have so-called voice of the customer methods, and there are a lot of them that are out there. And what I'm going to point out is just a few of what those could be. So some of the things that you want to do is obviously before you gather the voice of the customer, you need to know what target customer markets that you want to work with. So that's sort of the first step, is identify what your target audience is. What are those target customer segments? Beyond that, we really want to learn from customer complaints. We can learn an incredible amount from customer complaints. And in fact, as you can see, Bill Gates said, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. What else? We need to know what customers value. And sometimes what that means is that we have to lead the customer. In fact, that is something that David Kern said way back in about 1990 or 91 when Xerox Business Products and Systems division won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. And in an interview with David Kearns, who was CEO of Xerox at that time, he said, sometimes you have to lead the customer. You have to say, if we could do these things, what sorts of uses might you have for that? You have to engage the customer and allow them to exercise their imagination and consider their own needs and consider their own desires. But if you can do that, you can learn from those customers what those desires, what those needs really are. Now, typically, they're concerned about things that we would be able to identify: price, cost, value, the quality level, things like that. But almost certainly, you'll be able to uncover the occasional surprise. Discover unmet customer needs. Well, that's one of the big areas where data analytics is coming into play. An advanced analysis of data that is gathered in mass from, let's say, social media and so on. That takes us into social listening. Be active. Be out there on the internet. Listen to what's the chatter that is sitting out there on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever other social media might be out there. By the way, it's at this point that I maybe should give you a cautionary note about your own use of social media. So one of the trends, employment trends that goes on is that now you apply for a job at a company, it is very common for them to explore your social media. They may ask you for your Facebook address if you have a Facebook page or whatever it may be. They may not. Fundamentally, they're looking to see if you've been foolish in some way because that reflects on the potential, at least, for you being foolish about what you have to say about their company or how you represent their company and so on. My daughter is an executive who deals with healthcare and recruitment, particularly of physicians. But I can tell you that they look at social media to see whether or not that physician represents himself well and will in turn represent the company well. Excuse me. What else do we look for? Well, we might use focus groups and mock juries. In other words, you're looking at panels of experts in some sense or panels of peers, and we want to see how our product or how our service might be received by people who are potential customers or who are like our potential customers. In this case, like our potential customers. Ethnography. Now, this is a very expensive way, typically, of going out there and gathering the voice of the customer. So with ethnography, you literally go out and live among the people. Live among the people in the use environment for the product or for the service to see how it is that they engage with that product or service, to learn things that otherwise you might not have been able to learn. It is expensive, it is time consuming, but it's probably the most effective way of learning about what the customer needs are. As an example of that, Gillette, for example, developed a razor. They developed a razor for men explicitly in India, where there was little water, where they had to come up with a low-cost razor. They had to come up with a low-cost razor that was very durable, that would deal with heavy beards. So they were able to do that, but they learned about all of those needs by literally living among the people and observing the use environment. And then, of course, there are things like surveys, telephone interviews, and things of that sort. So some of the most common ones, and most companies do not use only one method for obtaining the voice of the customer. They use some blend of many, several at least usually. But these would be some of the typical ones. Surveys and focus groups. And of course, with surveys, there are certainly advantages and there are disadvantages. It's a fairly low-cost approach. You see the figure on phone response rate of 70 to 90%, but I can tell you that phone interviews are becoming less and less common. Okay? So, bear that in mind. And there are also people like me. I don't know if you've ever received a phone call where people have asked you to participate in a survey. I can tell you what my habit is. My habit, even if I have time, is to say, how long will it take? And if they say 10 minutes, then what I would typically say is something like this. Okay, at the end of 10 minutes, I'm done whether you are or not. Now, there's a reason for that, and the reason for that is that most of the people who conduct phone surveys are only paid for completed surveys. So it forces them into a position to be honest with you about how long, approximately at least, something should take. And if that survey is a well-developed one, then that's all been tested, pre-tested, in order to determine approximate length of time that it takes for the typical individual to complete the survey. And ordinarily speaking, unless I'm really engaged in whatever the survey topic is, at the end of that 10 minutes or whatever amount of time they gave me, if they're not done, I will hang up. So there are advantages, there are disadvantages of surveys and focus groups, and you can see those on this slide. You see surveys on the top, you see focus groups on the bottom. Two of the other really common approaches would be interviews and, of course, customer complaints that we've already talked about. So take a look at that. I have another graphic sitting in there for you about reasons why customers leave. Well, why do customers leave? Because that's one of the things that we need to know. Why do we need to know that? The reason that we need to know that is that research indicates that it costs approximately 3 to 5 times as much money to attract a new customer as it does to retain an existing customer. So when you lose an existing customer, it costs you more to backfill that loss. So some of the main reasons, some of them are things that we probably can't prevent. The person has died or they become financially unable to continue to perform as a customer. Sometimes they move away. Sometimes they're influenced away, influenced by advertising, influenced by friends, influenced by who knows what else, just what they've seen on the road, let's say. Okay. Or they get a better deal. Okay. Or there's some conflict that they're unhappy about and it wasn't resolved. And I could give you an example of that in my life with a phone company that caused me to move away from a cell provider only because they would not resolve a particular difference that was actually one that could be easily resolved. Or perceived indifference. What does that mean? It means that they think you don't care about them. And if people think you don't care about them, they are much more likely to move. By the way, don't think that a satisfied customer is necessarily a loyal customer. As an example of that, I would ask you a question. How many of you like cereal? I like cereal. I wouldn't say that I eat it that often, but I like cereal. I like Cheerios. I like Captain Crunch. I like Rice Chex. I like Raisin Bran. I like all kinds of cereal. And just because I moved from one type of cereal to another doesn't mean I was unhappy with what I was eating. It just means that, well, maybe I got a better buy on something. Maybe there was a special at the store. So never assume that customer satisfaction is enough. We want loyalty. We want advocacy. Okay. So take a look at some of the information that you've seen on this slide and the prior one. There's a little bit of advice on survey development here since surveys are used so commonly. So some of the typical questions you should ask yourself before you ever conduct a survey is, what do I really need to know when the survey is complete? And ordinarily speaking, you shouldn't be asking people questions that you can learn in some other way without taking their time. So what do I need to know when the survey is complete? How much do I have to spend? What information will the survey give me that I can't get elsewhere, or I can't get easily elsewhere at least? How much time do I have to complete the study? Who's going to be surveyed, and how is it that I get to them? Is it by phone? Is it electronically? Is it in person? Do I go to the mall? How do I do this? So you need to have answers to all those sorts of questions. There's actually a lot of art and a lot of science that sits behind development of a good, valid, reliable survey. So there are certain steps. Obviously, you would review the survey objectives. How many respondents do you need? So in other words, determine the appropriate sample size and so on. Identify specific areas of desired information. So for example, don't ask somebody their gender if you don't need to know their gender. Okay, don't ask them anything that you don't actually need to know. Okay, write some draft questions, and I say draft questions because the reality of it is they will probably need to be revised, or at least some of them will need to be revised. You'll find that the wording isn't as clear as you thought it was, or that it didn't really get to the heart of the matter that you really needed to get to, and things of that sort. Determine how it is you're going to measure things. Determine coding requirements, because you're probably going to analyze the data electronically. Design the survey, run a pilot study, make sure it works the way that you need it to, and so on. That includes testing the questions out, testing the responses that you get out, and testing how it is that you're going to learn what it is you need to learn. And then revise and go about your business of conducting the survey. There are things that we need to know when we develop products. So relative to products, David Garvin, who was a Harvard University business professor, identified 8 specific dimensions of quality that are of interest to customers. So what that means is that quality is not one thing. Quality is a bundle of things. And in that bundle, depending on what it is that you're trying to provide to customers, depending on the market niche, are they wealthier customers? Are they customers who have less disposable income? Who are they? Then there may be different elements of these 8 dimensions that are most important to them. So that's what we want to know, is what are the dimensions that are really most important to them, so that we can design our product accordingly for that particular market niche that we're seeking to capture. So as just one word descriptors, basically those would be performance, features, conformance, aesthetics, reliability, durability, serviceability, and perceived quality, each of which has some particular description. So in the product quality domain, reliability means the probability of a product remaining functional over a specified period of time. What that means is that is a statistical definition for product reliability. For durability, basically, how much of a beating can that thing take? So most of you probably know the brand Timex watches. Famously, Timex used to advertise their watches as takes a lickin' and keeps on ticking. In other words, they could take a beating and still continue to work. Durability, that's an important one depending on whatever the product is and who the target customer is. Excuse me. Serviceability, basically, how easy is it to repair something? Performance, what are the primary operating characteristics of the product? Features, those are the bells and whistles. Okay. Conformance, how closely does the product meet product specifications, design specifications? Aesthetics, that's the beauty test. How beautiful is it to somebody? How attractive is it? So it's a physical sort of attraction in that sense. And perceived quality, what do I think about it? So I think most people would say that a Mercedes is a higher quality vehicle than a Yugo. And you've probably never heard of a Yugo. It was an old car that didn't stay on the market very long coming out of Yugoslavia. Its first pass rate was essentially negative. It did not have cars that passed first inspection. They were regarded almost as throwaway cars that when people were done with them, they'd throw them in, drive them into a ditch and abandon them, sell them for scrap metal. So any tangible physical product, you should be thinking about what are the dimensions among these 8 that are most important to our target customers. Equally, there are service quality dimensions. So David Garvin didn't develop these, but these are dimensions that others have identified for services. So reliability has a little bit different meaning than it does for a product. Reliability means consistency or error-free dependability. Responsiveness. How willing is the company or its people to take care of the needs of the customer? How quickly? Okay. How thoroughly? So tangibles, what's the service environment where the service is being provided? Competence. Do the people who engage with the customer have the right skills, the right knowledge? Do they have them in a timely fashion? Okay. Courtesy. How do they behave toward you? Do you feel as though you're being respected when they engage with you, or do they engage with you as though you're just an object, or even worse, disdainfully? Security, freedom from danger, freedom from risk. How about access, ease of making contact? Is that simple or is that hard? Communication should be understandable to the customer, right? Understandable to the customer, not company-specific jargon or highly technical jargon, but something that is accessible and understandable to the target customer base that the company is trying to provide the service to. And empathy. It's sort of that walk a mile in my shoes attitude that says adopt the customer's viewpoint, try to understand it from the customer perspective. So when you're competing on quality, you probably can't compete on all of those dimensions, whether it's a service or whether it's a product. So instead, what you would try and do is identify the ones that are important to the customer, the market niche that you're trying to capture or that you're trying to serve. We need to look at a few other things. So I usually recommend that if you are developing a product or developing a service, then you need to think about something called the KANO customer needs model. So Noriaki Kano was a Japanese quality engineer, and his model is a very simple one. It basically divides customer needs into 3 primary categories. Okay? Those are basically ones that are called satisfiers. The more you have, the more the people are satisfied. Okay? Dissatisfiers, if they're not there, sometimes those are called must-haves. Okay, dissatisfiers, must-haves. So customers may not even talk to you about it, but if something's not there, that's one of these. They're unhappy. I buy a car, I expect it to have wheels on it. And if they're not there, I'm going to be real unhappy. So you need to make sure all of the dissatisfiers are taken care of. You need to make sure the satisfiers are there and know that the higher degree to which they're there, the more satisfaction you create. But then you need to look at so-called exciters or delighters. Exciters or delighters. The ones that are in the upper left-hand corner of this graph that say attractive needs. Okay, those are things that the customer doesn't necessarily anticipate, but if they're there, they're going to be happy. Now, I should probably tell you that there is another dimension to this graph, and the other dimension to this graph is time. So oftentimes, the thing that is exciting initially, over time, becomes just expected or even dissatisfying. I'll give you two examples. So how many of you have GPS in your car? Okay, probably a lot of you, okay, but you may not have paid extra for it, or you may not be willing to pay extra for it. I don't know about you, but I have something instead of GPS. Well, actually, I do have GPS in my car, but it isn't that I sought it out, okay? And it wouldn't have made much difference to me, although I occasionally use it, because I have something better. What I have is I have a Swiss Army knife, right? I may call it a mobile phone, but fundamentally I have a Swiss Army knife. It does all kinds of things. It's a flashlight, it's a phone, it's a navigation device. I can use it as an entertainment device. I can use this for so many things, and you probably know more uses on yours than I know on mine. Okay? But I certainly have navigation. I have GPS on this thing. So that thing that initially was an exciter and the automobile manufacturers were able to charge extra for, GPS, now it's become pretty much passé. As another example, I used to work for Bosch & Lomb. I used to be basically their lead biostatistician and their clinical studies design and analysis manager over contact lens products. Now, I can tell you that at the time that I was there was a surgery that was a predecessor to LASIK. Okay, and normally if you were sitting in the room, I would say, how many of you have had LASIK? And I would be one of the people to raise my hands. I've had LASIK. I'm very happy with the results. You see the glasses that I have on? These are just cheap readers. Okay, very cheap readers. I probably paid $5 or $6 for them or something like that. Okay, so ordinarily speaking, when you have LASIK, you make a choice. Do you want to see clearly far away or close up? I had always needed glasses for far away, meaning when I went to a movie, when I played sports, didn't matter. Okay, when I was driving, I needed my glasses. Well, I decided I wanted to be able to see a movie clearly without glasses, to walk in the rain without my glasses getting wet, to drive without my glasses. That's what I decided on. For some people, LASIK will take care of correcting both near and far. Okay, but the predecessor to LASIK was something called radial keratotomy. Now imagine this. Imagine that somebody uses a fine razor blade and slices the cornea in your eye in several places. Okay, it literally slices it in several places. And they do that for the reason of reshaping your cornea. But the healing time, the recovery time, is months, during which time you are wearing bandaging over your eye, all of which means that when you're done, you can look forward to having the other eye done. So it isn't that sort of surgery isn't occasionally helpful to people. It is. There are people for whom that helps, that they're not candidates for LASIK. On the other hand, most of us by today's standards would say, wow, that is barbaric. Okay, so that thing that was as an exciter when it came out, people were generally very, very happy with the results of radial keratotomy. But it was very expensive, and the process itself was not a pleasant process whatsoever. Happy with the result, not with the process. Nevertheless, overall, it was an exciter or delighter. Now we consider it basically barbaric. So what you have on this particular slide is just a little bit more description of satisfiers, dissatisfiers, exciters, delighters. The key comment that I want to make is that in terms of exciters and delighters, oftentimes the customer themselves can't identify those. This is where that quote that I gave you from David Kearns earlier, the former CEO of the Xerox Corporation, comes into play. Sometimes you have to lead the customer. You have to be able to say, if we could do this, what sort of uses might you have? And what that really means is something like this. Even you don't know all the capabilities inside your own company if you're out there in the working world. How can you possibly expect your customers to have knowledge of everything that you have the ability to do? You have to lead the customer. So that's just a quick and dirty overview of a little bit on customer needs and how it is that we might be able to identify those needs. Later we'll worry about how to translate those needs into tangible physical products or services. But for now, this is just a little bit of information on how it is that you identify those things in the first place. Thanks.